companies approach it from the opposite direction, trying to do AI without that data governance, and that is a very hard exercise to not have that data discipline right at the bottom layer of all of this.
And it's very granular. So in Dubai government, every government department has to have an AI officer. And not only that, every government department has to have an a data repository, that every single piece of data that is valuable to the company or the organization is identified and classified.
I mean, I think those are such cornerstone pieces. But I want to talk to you about two different things. One is Meta's system cards were actually, I think, a pretty big leap in terms of helping companies understand what is in a model or an AI system and how do we actually transmit information about that effectively, to the earlier points on distilling that down. But as AI systems become more complex, what are you seeing as the newest challenges that developers are facing in terms of actually opening up that black box and explaining AI or creating real transparency around the most complex, the most advanced, the most sophisticated systems?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because as you were talking, Nicole, it made me think about how you're absolutely right. Like, transparency of 300 different documents or 5,000 words of a treatise on what we're doing isn't helpful if it's not understandable. So sometimes less is more. Sometimes if you can distill what's going on in less, show it pictorially, have an interactive way of being able to play around with what different tools do, that's much more easily understandable by people, and that's really where we're trying to get to. Transparency for transparency's sake isn't useful. Understanding is so you can know what you want and what you don't want to do. And actually, as we get into more and more capable models, and as we get into different techniques in machine learning or different kinds of learning, where actually human inputs are less relevant to self-supervised learning, unsupervised learning, where the model is itself learning what it needs to do, we're seeing absolute brilliant leaps in performance in doing this, and actually greater applications of what we can achieve using it. But with that greater performance comes a bit of a hit on understanding what's going on underneath that black box. Not even just from governments or from users, but from the developers and from the experts themselves who are overseeing these technologies. And that's kind of the beauty and the curse.
Telefon się ładuje.
So trying to unearth and open that black box, what we really are talking about is interpretability. Do we understand how and why it's working the way it's working, rather than just what is it that you're actually seeing? And this has been kind of like I don't know, the metaphor is a golden egg. You're trying to find the light at the end of the tunnel. We're trying to figure out how and why these systems are working. And actually we are making good progress in this. So with sort of advanced frontier models at the moment, what we're seeing is that we can ask the model to give us its chain of thought. So if you're asking it, what's the best baked good in Germany, as I might or might not have done this morning, it can tell you what kinds of reasoning it went to give you the answer. So first it might ask, well, what does good mean in this context? Does it mean the healthiest? Does it mean the most delicious? And it makes an assumption. Once it does that, it says, well, maybe based on the geolocation of who's asking me, should I be sort of thinking about in Charlottenburg, where the best baked good is even accessible? What's the point of saying a best baked good if this person can't even get to it? So you start to see how it is thinking about what output it gives you. And you'll note that at each stage of this, you can disagree with why it's come to that reasoning. And that kind of interpretability, that understanding of why a model output what it output, is really useful for controlling. So it's really useful for being able to understand if we sort of reduce this little lever inside the model, it might give us a different output. You talked about hallucinations. Is there a way of understanding through this increased interpretability when a model is hallucinating? Is there a way to get the model to actually accept and say, hey, to be honest, this is where models are not as great at the moment. They are really bad at telling you when they don't know something. They are they're mostly empowered to kind of give you an answer at all costs, but that is changing with interpretability. So actually, if a model says, I'm not too sure about that, here's my best guess, that's very different to it saying with 100% certainty this is the answer, because then as a human user you can use your own intuition to push back against it if you need. So this idea of interpretability is really taking hold. It's still nascent, but it's something that in sort of frontier labs we're trying to play around with, because I think can be ultimately really helpful.
Yeah, and I think the deep research models are actually really good for this, really helpful for this. I asked something the other day, and I think that one of the most useful things that it said to me in the chain of thought was, I actually don't have a lot of sources for this. I'm not really finding anything that tells me the answer to this. Actually, it's not surprising. It was a super, super weird legal question, so I would have been surprised. I couldn't find anything. That's why I went. So I was like, all right, that's fair. But it's the limitation, right? We're always looking for information on the capabilities and the limitations of models. And when a model can self-articulate, here's my limitation, here's the limitation of my knowledge base, or the limitation of the research, I was able to even find out the wide open internet, right? Scanning all of the data I had, there was nothing on this question. That's super helpful.
Yeah, and actually it gets back to the very thing we started to talk about, which is trust. Which is when that model outputs an answer, it gives you enough information for you to be able to make a determined assumption of what's going on. If it says it didn't find enough sources, you know to take that with a pinch of salt rather than taking its guarantee. So I think it's about trust and control at the end of the day.
Yeah, and also just making sure that education, I think, has been such a theme here, that people are educated to look at the chain of thought, look at the right kinds of outputs, depending on what the model is and what it's used for. That can either be really helpful or maybe superfluous. So it's just making sure that you have the right information in front of people. But I want to take that and move it into a different domain, which is accountability. I think accountability is another very vexing concept in AI ethics, because accountability means a lot of things in different industries to different people. But Riaan, I'd love to talk to you about what is, the financial services experience on this. And I'll say, from working with, we work with a fair number of banks and insurers, accountability is really critical, because that's actually often baked into the regulatory framework from the beginning. Without any reference to AI, accountability in financial services is a cornerstone of bank supervision, bank management. How do you think about accountability and keeping humans in the loop, or is that even the right frame to work with?
I think we're touching on a very, again, interesting challenge that's been there for a super long time already, regardless of AI or not. Because when we rely on humans do not have perfect recall, they do not understand all the rules in a perfect way, yet we allow them to make decisions because we can hold the individual accountable. There's a direct relationship between the decision and the person that made the decision. So we now take that into the AI world, and I find it fascinating that when we talk about interpretability, we think that when the AI model tells us what it's doing, that's interpretability. That's not traditionally what interpretability meant. Interpretability means that you can have an outside view and predict what the outcomes are going to be. And we can't look into the vector database. We can't see the relationships that the LM has built up in itself. So when it comes to accountability, what we have found, the models are still super fragile. And as much as they try and explain to you their reasoning and why they come up with an answer, something that you would think logically would lead to one outcome, and you make a change, you get something completely different, and it's impossible to know what happened there. So the fragility on the one hand, and being super fragmented in the third-party ecosystem. And I'm sure I can mention this, I don't know if I get sued, but Microsoft with Copilot, that is not a single solution. Those are 30+ solutions that they're trying to stitch together within the platform. You have no idea, and we've had various sessions with them to try and understand how do we manage the guardrails in a consistent manner. And we've been spending hours and hours with Microsoft specialists to find, you've got to tweak this thing here and then tweak that thing there, and maybe if you do something here, it will change something there. And bringing all that back to accountability, that is super difficult for us, because we need to be able to connect decisions and outcomes to specific inputs, be it a human or be it a systemic input. And I think for us, that's where we believe it's still early days. So we're also focusing a lot on the foundational items around data management. And I think that gets way too little focus. And we all talk about the fancy front and stuff, and everybody's excited about what it can do and what it can't do. But the data foundational items are part of how we can ensure accountability for as and when we get to a more stable and mature environment.
I mean, we see this a lot, actually, that companies dealing with these, adopting truly multifaceted, I'm not even going to call them general purpose, because I think everything in a way is general purpose, but multifaceted products right now struggle with the governance of them, because in the hands of employees, they can do so many different things, and controlling that can be very, very challenging from an organizational perspective. So I think it's like a good transition to asking all of you, really any panelist who wants to weigh in, what do you think the changes coming in 6 months, 9 months, a year are going to be that are really going to, put our ethics or our governance frameworks to the test? Do we need new regulation? Do we need new governance approaches based on the very, very fast pace of change, or is what we have durable for the years to come?
And I can start from the technological perspective. What we see already, it's not really mainstream right now, are two approaches. One is pre-prompting, and then exit strategy from prompts as well. For example, if somebody wants to leak sensitive information from a company or academic user or something, asking a research question to one of the LLMs, a lot of the startups are right now, there's already mature solutions in this that they do pre-prompting. So before they prompt, you can check what is being sent to the AI engine. And also they do aggregation. So there's aggregation layer where instead of you sending the prompt to one LLM engine, they check what is cheaper, what is faster, what is much better, and which answers make more sense. And that by itself is a huge undertaking. And there are companies that are doing it much better than others. And on the other hand, before submitting any kind of answer to the consumer that could be unethical, hallucinating, or something, there's something called also post-prompt exit strategy. And there they filter what is shown to the person that is not like a dark answer or an unethical answer or racist or any kind of other kind of a tangent kind of answer. Those are we're seeing as well. Those still less mature than the pre-prompting, the exit strategy. I mean, are less mature than pre-prompting. But those are some technical enforcement that we see. When it comes to ethics and ethical kind of enforcement through policy and guidelines and acceptable use policies of things like that, or governance even over AI providers, including LLMs, we see little traction. The reason for that is that a lot of these are open to interpretation. A lot of these are not solid, mathematical answers. You cannot quantify them. They're more like qualitative answers, and it's very hard for any kind of policy to have a hold over the answers because they're open to interpretation. Somebody might read the same answer in different ways. Sarcasm is really hard to also police as well. Also the sources and vetting of the sources, especially when you have LLMs that don't have a training set but actually go to the internet with like a deep search to get you the latest information. The source might be completely off or outdated. I'll give you an example. There was an engine that was trying to tell you what is the nearest pharmacy to you. And it was using the pharmacies that were shown on the internet. But somebody forgot to update the website that is actually what are the pharmacies that are working that month. Even though the data set was every Tuesday, those pharmacies are the ones up. But because somebody forgot to renew it, they just gave the wrong answer. So all of these things are there in work in progress, but we're going to see more maturity over time, of course.
Yeah, and I think that approach to supervision is something that really is maturing, needs to mature. This comes up a lot in legal because people are, of course, worried about asking chatbots questions like, how do I violate my own corporate policy? So when we work with the lawyers within companies, this is always a question we get. How much supervision, how much, essentially monitoring do we need to do of our employees using our own chatbots? I want to open it up to the group. What else do we think is going to challenge ethical or even regulatory frameworks going forward?
For me, one of the things is the future of work. As these models get better and better and better, the workflows will change, the job descriptions will change, and so how do we bring our organizations along? And how do we upskill, reskill, reimagine how, in our case, how we do business? And what our people are going to be contributing to. So augmentation, and how do we manage the emotional roller coaster of change? Because when you tell people, myself, I've been in technology all my life, let's reimagine. A part of me is like, oh my God, okay, am I going to still have a job 10 years from now? I don't know. I'm a techno optimist, right? It's built in me. And if I think this, imagine the line operators in our factories, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just because I wanted to say exactly the same thing. I think the ethical use of models and technology, we're going to solve that problem. That's not a concern for me. I think governments are so focused on that that they forget about the future of work. And if we truly want to have ethical solutions out there, and if we truly want to put the human in the loop and in the middle, we've got to solve that problem. And I really worry about that in terms of creating a massive, exacerbating the digital divide that already exists, the social divide that exists. So, I'm very passionate about that the future of work needs to be priority number one for governments.
Disparity will increase rather than decrease.
I mean, I maybe building on this, because this is actually a problem that's maybe not new, right? It's not Gen AI specific problem. As you were asking the question, what's the future? I'm kind of going back to very old school, basic fundamental questions, like the future of work, like do we find a point of convergence, or will there be like many equilibria between geographies or even firms, right? That we were already discussing for traditional machine learning, and that I think are in times where some multilateral frameworks are kind of like at the boundaries of kind of working. I think that's really relevant for a technology that ultimately scales beyond borders. And I think those are for me the things that we really need to solve. And I totally agree with you. All that other stuff we can kind of find protocols for and solve. I'm very confident we will have solutions for that. So.
Yeah, I mean, just building on that, I mean, I think it also can go back to sort of like schooling and education. Like we have, as you just said, focused a lot on the sort of how do you sort of fix the plane while it's flying? Well, the plane is flying. How do you get the next generation to understand it, get to grips with it, and be in control of how they want to use it or not want to use it? So that's the earlier generations, and for the people who are in the workforce now, there is a role for governments to be able to set up workforce retraining programs for people to be able to change industries if they need to, make it easier to go from one sector to another, especially for people who've been in the same industry for 10, 15 years and feel stuck that they can't leave. So that's going to be really crucial, I think, in the next 5, 10 years.
It's interesting because I've been spending a lot of time recently in the UAE, and I think it's one of the places that's been most effective at creating centers and universities and programs that are really meant to upskill, reskill, but also create a deep AI focus. When you have MBZ UI, UAI, just completely focused on AI on its own. This is something that, recently people have been proposing for countries like Morocco or even more globally, and in the US I don't think we have anything quite like that yet, although we certainly have AI programs that are very advanced. But maybe I'll turn it back to Dr. Zarouni to just finish out on why is there this palpable excitement about AI in the UAE, and how have you seen that kind of attract talent or upskill talent? Where do you think the kind of focus is for the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
I think it all comes down to leadership. Like I said, we had the foundation with 100% paperless. Blockchain from 2016 until 2020, we're done with it. Every applicable use case that was blockchain was realized by 2020. Super early, super curated AI, data, Dubai data establishment, digital Dubai across every use case, every user journey across the city, whether it's in public sector, private sector, having CEOs of every government, be a CEO of AI in every government entity. All of these things add to incrementally to how AI is used. And this is, I think, the bottom line. Buy-in from the leadership is to top-down kind of approach, having a North Star very clear and working towards it, yearly, 10-year programs, stability, trust, and that this is going to be done. And, having that very clear, there's little time wasted on how and when and what, and having a clear path is the straight line is the shortest path. And this is the way of the buy.
Well, you all heard it. Create your North Star and follow it. And whether that's principles or workforce development, I think this is a fantastic discussion about how to really supercharge AI using ethics and using skills and kind of a people-focused approach. But we're out of time. Thank you to our panel for joining us. It's been a fantastic discussion.
Thank you.